Hello everyone. In this video I will show you how to create an ASP.NET Core Web application that connects to an SQL Server database and performs CRUD operation. This means that the application allows us to create new clients, to read the list of clients from the database, to update the client's data, and also to delete clients. So let's create a new client. So here all the fields are required, and if I click on submit without providing all the fields, I will obtain this error message. Now let's complete the address and let's submit the data. And here we can see that we have a new client. Now we can update the data of this client. So let's click on edit. And here we can, for example, change the email address. Let's add number 2. We can also update the phone number. And let's click on submit. So here we can see that the email address has changed and also the phone number is modified. Now we can delete a client. So let's click on this delete button. And we can see that the client has been deleted. Let's create a new project. Then here let's select C# and let's select Web Application. Then in this list, we can select this option, ASP.NET Core Web Application. So let's select it and let's click Next. Let's call this project My Store. Then let's click Next. In this window, we can select this latest version of the .NET Core framework, and also we can disable HTTPS. Now let's click Create. Now the project has been created, so now we need to connect to the SQL Server and we need to create a database and a table. So we can either click on Server Explorer or also we can click on View, then Server Explorer, and in this window we need to create a new connection, so we can click on this button. So in this window we have to obtain this value, Microsoft SQL Server, SQL Client. So if you don't have this value in this field, then you have to click on Change. Then we need to select Microsoft SQL Server, then let's click on OK. So here we have to provide the server name. And because the server is installed on my computer, so I have to write localhost, or also I can write dot, then slash, then the instance name. So the instance name in my case is SQL Express. So for more information how to find the instance name, you can see the video link that is available in the description. Now here we have to provide the name of the database. So I want to create a new database and I will call it My Store. Now let's click on OK. So this database does not exist and I want to create it. So let's click on Yes. Now we are connected to the database and we can expand this connection. So we can expand tables, and for the moment we don't have any table. And to create a new table, I can use the SQL Query. So let's make a right click on the connection name, then New Query. So here we can write the SQL queries. So I will write 2 queries that allows me to create a new table and to fill it with some rows. So this first query allows us to create a new table called Clients. This table contains the ID, which is auto-incremental. It contains the name, the email, the phone, and the address. It also contains the created @ column. So this column has a default timestamp. And then I filled this table with 6 rows. You can find these 2 queries in the description of this video. Now to execute these 2 queries, we can use this green Run button. And we can see that the queries have been executed correctly. Now let's refresh the connection to find our table. So here we can see that we have this table, and to see its content we can make a right click, then show table data. And here we can see that our table contains these 6 rows. Now we need to add a new package to this project that allows us to connect to the SQL Server. So this package is called Sql Client. So let's make a right click on the project name. Then manage NuGet packages. Then let's click on browse. And in the search field we have to write system.data.sql client. Then we have to select this first package. Now let's install it. Let's click on OK. Then I accept. Now the package is installed correctly, so we can close this page. Now let's run the application. So here we can either select the name of the application or also we can select IIS Express. Now let's click on this run button. So this is the default application. It contains this menu which contains 2 items, home and privacy. So let's click on privacy. So we obtain this page which is accessible at this URL which ends with privacy. And privacy here is the name of the Razor page without the extension. Now we need to add here a new item called clients, which allows us to see the list of the clients in the database. So let's close the browser and let's create a new Razor page. So we have to create it in the pages folder. So here I want to organize my Razor page into a new folder. So to create a new folder, I have to make a right click on pages, then add, then new folder. And I will call this folder clients. Then let's create a new Razor page inside this folder. So we have to make a right click, then add, then Razor page. Let's select Razor page empty, then add. Then here let's select Razor page empty and let's call it index.cshtml. So let's click on add. So here we can see that we have 2 new files, index.cshtml and index.cshtml.cs. So this is our page, or also we can call it the view, and this is our model. So let's open the model. And here in the model we have this method called onGet. So this method is executed when we access to the page using the HTTP GET method. And in this method we need to access to the database and to read the data from the clients table. So first let's create a new class called client info that will store the data of only one client from the database. We can create the new class into this file just after the first class. So just here I will create a new class. Then let's create public variables that will store the data from the database. So for the ID it is an integer into the database, but here I will create a variable of type string. So here let's create a string called ID. Of course it is public. So this class allows us to store the data of only one client. And to store the data of all the clients, we need to create a list. So we need to create this list into the model. And it will be a public variable so we can read it from the page. So this is our list. It is called list clients and it is a list of client info. Now we need to fill this list in the onGet method. So first we need to add a try-catch block. Then in the try we need to connect to the database. So first let's create the connection string. So we can obtain this connection string from our connection to the database. So let's click on Server Explorer, then let's click on the name of this connection, and here in the properties we need to copy this connection string. Let's paste it just here. And here we have this error because we need to add a second slash. Now let's create our SQL connection. So here we can see that we have an error because we need to use the SQL Client namespace. So let's add it just here. Now let's open the connection. Then let's create the SQL query that allows us to read the data from the client's table. So this query allows us to read all the rows from the client's table. Now let's create the SQL command. So this command allows us to execute our SQL query. Now let's execute this command and let's obtain the SQL data reader. Then using a while loop we can read the data from the table. And of course we need to save this data into a client info object. So here, as I told you, ID is of type string, but in the database it is of type integer. That's why we need to add an empty string to be able to convert this integer into a string. Also, I did not create this variable into this class. So let's create it. And now let's add this object into our list. So this is our list. We can also add here a statement that allows us to show the error on the console in case if we have an exception. Now let's go to the page. So we can make a right click, then go to page. So in the page we have @page, which means that we will not use any controller. And here we have the name of the model which is associated to this page. In this area we can write some C# code. And here we can write the HTML code. So first let's write the title of this page. Then let's add a button that allows us to create a new client. So this button is called New Client and it takes us to this link. So this link for the moment does not exist and we need to create it later. Then let's create an HTML table. Then let's add the header row into this table. We can also create the body of this table, which is empty for the moment. And now let's create an item of this page into the menu of the application. So let's go to Shared, then Layout, and here let's copy this code. So this code corresponds to the privacy item. So let's copy it and let's paste it just here. Now let's rename the item. So it will be clients. And of course we have to change the link. So the link is the Razor page without the extension. So here our page is called index.cshtml. So the link will be only index. But because this page is available in the clients folder, then we have to start with the name of the folder. So we have to write clients, which is the name of the folder, then the name of the Razor page without the extension, which is index. Now let's run the application. Then let's click on clients. And here we have this title and we have this empty table. Now let's fill this table from the database. So here in the body we need a for each loop. So in this loop we will read the list of the clients from this variable which is called list clients and which is defined in the model. And to be able to access this variable in the page, we have to use the model class. So here each item corresponds to a client info object, and we need to use it to fill the row. So here let's create only one row. So this row is for the moment empty and it contains 6 cells in addition to this cell number 7, which contains 2 buttons. This button is called edit and it allows us to edit the client, and this is the delete button, which allows us to delete the client. So when we click on the edit button, we will go to this link, which is not defined for the moment. And once we go to this link, we have to provide it with the ID of the client that we need to edit. Also, in the delete page, we have to go to this link and we have to provide this link with the ID of the client that we need to edit. Now let's complete this row. So we will complete it using this object. And to be able to use this object, we have to use the @ character. Now let's run the application. Then let's click on Clients. And here we have the list of the clients from the database. Now let's create the new Razor page that allows us to create a new client. So let's make a right click on the Clients folder, then Add, then Razor page. So let's select Razor page empty. And here let's call it Create. So here we have the new Razor page. And let's create the title of this page. Then let's create the form that will allow us to send the data of the new client. So here I will use the post method. Then let's create the different fields of this form. So this is the first row, which contains the first field, and the first field is called name, and also it is called the name. So this is the name of the variable that will be sent to the server, and initially it is empty. So for the moment, here we have the label, which has this width, and we have the input field, which has this width, which means that the input field will have a width which is twice the width of the label. Now let's copy this row. And let's create the new row, which is for the email. So here we have to change the name of this field and let's call it email. Then let's create another row for the phone number. So let's change the label text. And also let's change the name of the input field. Now let's create a new row for the address. And finally, let's create another row for the submit button. So here we have the submit button, but also we have the cancel button, which will take us to the main page. So now let's go to the model. We can make a right click, then view code. So in the model, we can create a new variable of type client info. Of course, it should be public, so we can read it from the page. And we can initialize it when we receive the data using the post method. So here we need to create a new method called onPost, which will be executed when we send the data of this form using the submit button. So in this method, we can read the data of the form and we can put this data into this object. So first we can fill the name, And we can fill the name from the request. So here we have to provide the name of the input field that we will use to fill this variable. Now let's do the same thing with the other variables of the client info object. So if any field is empty, we can show an error message. So let's create a new global variable that allows us to save the error message. And then let's validate the different fields. So if any field is empty, we have to fill this variable with this error message, and then we can exit this method. Otherwise, we can save the data into the database. So here let's write a command to say that here we need to save the data into the database. So after saving the data into the database, we can return a success message to the user. So let's create a new global variable that allows us to return the success message. Then here let's clear the different fields of the client object. And then let's return the success message. So we can add the new client into the database later. But for the moment, let's display the error message if we have any empty field. So let's go to the page, and here just before the form, we can check if we have any error message. So if the error message is not empty, then we have to display this alert. Also, we have to fill the form with the old data if we have any error. So here we can fill the value attribute, and we can use the client info object. So here we have to fill the name. Then here we have to fill the email. Then here we have to fill the phone. And finally, we have to fill the address. Also, we can do the same thing if we have a success message. So if we have a success message, we can show the confirmation that the data is correct. We can do this just before the two buttons. So if the success message is not empty, then we have to display this information to the user. Now let's test the application. So let's run it. Let's click on Clients. Then let's click on New Client. So we can fill this form. Let's write any name. And let's click on Submit. So here we can see that we have this error message, but we did not lose the old value of the name field. So we can close this error message, and let's provide the other fields. Now let's click on the Submit button. So here we can see that we have this success message and all the fields are clear now. Now let's add this user to the database. So let's go to our model. And here let's add the try catch block. So in the catch block, we have an exception. This means that we have an error. So we can fill the error message and we can exit this method. So here we will fill the error message with the error of the exception. And of course, we need to exit the method. Now in the try, we need to connect to the database. So first, let's create the connection string. So let's fill this variable from the connection string of our connection to the database. So let's select this connection. Then let's copy the connection string from the properties. Let's paste it just here. And let's add a second slash to correct the error. Now let's create the SQL connection. And of course, we need to add the SQL client namespace. Now let's open the connection. Then let's create the SQL query. So here I will add a new client into the clients table, and I will add the name, the email, the phone, and the address. And then I have to replace these parameters with the data that I received from the form. So here we need to create an SQL command, and this command will execute this SQL query. Then we have to replace these parameters with the data that we received from the form. And finally, we have to execute the SQL query. So if the new client is added correctly to the database, we can either display this success message, or also we can redirect the user to the list of the clients. So we have just to add this statement, which makes the redirection of the user. Now let's test the application. Let's click on Clients. Then let's create a new client. Let's click on the Submit button. So we have this error message because we have to provide the address. So let's complete the address. Then let's click on Submit. So here we have this error. So this is an SQL exception error because I declared the email to be unique, but this email is already used. So to fix this, I have just to change the email. So let's hide the alert and let's change the email. Let's write 2, for example, and let's click on Submit. So we can see that this row has been added, and we can see that the email is Bob2. This is because we have this email already. Now I will show you how to edit the client. So let's close the application. And let's create a new Razor page into the clients folder. So let's call it Edit. So in this page, we can make a copy of the form of the create form. So let's go to the create form and we can copy everything. We can copy from here to the end. And then let's paste it here. So of course we need to change the title of the page. And because this form is used to edit the client, then we have to add a hidden input into the form that will contain the ID of the client. So this page requires some variables. It requires the error message, the client info, and also it requires the success message. So let's go to the model and let's create these variables as public variables. So we can access the edit page using two methods. The get method, which allows us to see the data of the current client, and the post method, which allows us to update the data of the client. So here we need to create the onPost method. Now in the onGet method, we have to read the ID of the client and we need to fill this object which will be displayed into the page. So to read the ID, we have to use this statement and we have to provide the name of the parameter, which is the ID. Now let's connect to the database. So in the catch, we can display the error message. And in the try, we need to connect to the database and to fill the client info object. So here we have our connection string, then we created the SQL connection, then we opened the connection, then we selected the client with the corresponding ID. So this ID is what we have received from the request. Then we have to create the SQL command that allows us to execute the SQL query. And then we have to replace this parameter with the ID that we have received from the request. Then we have to create the SQL data reader, and we have to fill the client info with the data from the database. So as I told you, the ID is of type string, but getInt32 will give us an integer. So we have to add an empty string to convert this integer into a string. But here we have some errors. This is because we have to use the SQL Client namespace. Now let's implement the onPost method. So here we have to fill our client info with the data that we received from the form. So here we can use request.form, and we have to provide the name of the input field. Then if any field is empty, then we have to display an error message, and we have to exit this function. So here our error message is all fields are required. Now let's try to connect to the database. So let's add a try catch block. So in the catch we have to display the error message, then we have to exit the method. And in the try we have to connect to the database and to update the data of the client. So this is our connection string. This is the SQL connection. We need to open the connection, and we have to create the SQL query. So this query allows us to update the client. And of course we will update the name, the email, the phone, and the address using these parameters. And the condition is that the ID is the same as the ID of the client. Of course we have to replace these parameters and the ID also using the data that we received from the form. So we can do this here. And finally we have to execute the SQL query. So if the data is updated correctly, we can redirect the user. So just after the try catch, we have to add the following statement, which allows us to redirect the user to the list of clients. Now let's test the application. Let's click on Clients. Then let's edit this last client. So let's click on Edit. So here we have the data of the selected client. And if we take a look on the URL, we can see that it ends with the ID of this client. Now let's clear the address, for example. And let's click on Submit. But here we have this exception because I did a mistake into the form. So we can stop the application. Now let's go to the page. And here we can see that I did not write the name input correctly. So let's correct this. And let's run the application again. Then let's click on Clients. And let's edit the last client. Let's make the address clear and let's click on Submit. So we can see that we have this error message. So let's provide a valid address. And also we can change the name. Now let's click on Submit. So here we can see that the name has been modified and also the address has changed. Now I will show you how to delete a client. So let's close the application and let's create a new Razor page. So I will create it into the clients folder. Let's select Razor page empty, then add. So for the delete page, I don't need the model, I only need the page. So I will select Razor view and I will call it delete. So here we have a command, we can delete it. And also this page does not need any controller, so we have to add @page. Then we need to use the SQL Client namespace. So we have to add @using and the namespace. Then here we can write the C# code that allows us to delete the current client. So here we will read the ID of the client that we need to delete. Then here we have our connection string. Then this is the SQL connection. Of course, we need to open the connection, and then this is the SQL query that allows us to delete the client. Then we have to execute this query using an SQL command. So this is the SQL command, and here we will execute this command. Of course, here we will replace the ID by the ID that we have received into the request. So after removing the client, we will redirect the user to the list of clients. Now let's test the application. Let's click on clients. Then here let's delete the last client. So we can see that the last client has been deleted, and also we are redirected to the list of clients.